For a moment, imagine standing on the deck of one of those ships, steel cutting through dark water, no cheering crowds, no press cameras, just orders, radar screens, and a destination that has made global powers nervous for decades. Iran, a country already sitting at the center of sanctions, shadow wars, proxy conflicts, and fragile diplomacy. Now add two nuclear-armed superpowers sailing closer, not as enemies of Iran, but as partners. The question almost asks itself, why now, and what does this change? To understand why this feels like a massive escalation, you have to understand how rare this alignment actually is. Russia and China cooperate often, but coordinated naval activity tied directly to Iran sends a message that goes beyond routine drills. This isn't about training sailors or showing flags. This is about signaling. And signaling in global power politics can be just as impactful as missiles. Iran's geography alone explains part of the story. It sits next to the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow stretch of water through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes. That's not a talking point. That's an economic pressure point for the entire planet. Any military movement in or around Iran automatically makes energy markets twitch, insurers nervous, and policymakers start checking worst-case scenarios. Now imagine that pressure point being quietly backed by Russian and Chinese naval power. There's also a history whispering in the background. Russia and Iran have built military cooperation over years, from weapon systems to intelligence sharing. China, meanwhile, has poured billions into long-term economic agreements with Tehran, securing energy supplies and infrastructure projects that stretch decades into the future. What we're seeing now isn't sudden friendship. It is the visible tip of a relationship that has been deepening quietly while much of the world was distracted. One detail that caught analysts off guard was timing. This movement didn't happen during calm diplomacy. It came at a moment when Iran is under intense international pressure, when regional tensions are already high, and when relations between the West, Russia, and China are at their lowest point in years. Moves like this are rarely accidental. They're layered, and every layer adds meaning. Another detail worth pausing on is location. These aren't ships sailing in distant waters with symbolic value. They're moving toward an area where Western naval forces already operate heavily. That proximity matters. When powerful navies share the same crowded waters, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. History is full of conflicts that didn't start with intention, but with misinterpretation. For Russia, this move fits into a broader pattern. Over the past decade, Moscow has steadily expanded its naval footprint beyond its immediate neighborhood. From the Mediterranean to the Red Sea, Russian warships are showing up in places where they rarely appeared during the post-Cold War years. Each appearance reinforces a message. Russia is not retreating from global power competition. It's repositioning itself inside it. China's presence may be even more significant. Traditionally, Beijing avoided overt military involvement in Middle Eastern power struggles, preferring trade over tension. But that approach has been evolving. China now imports a large portion of its energy from the region, and protecting supply routes has become a strategic priority. Sending warships alongside Russia toward Iran suggests China is becoming more comfortable turning economic interests into military posture. Here's an insight many people miss. Naval power isn't just about combat. It's about endurance. Warships can stay at sea for months. They can observe, deter, and respond without crossing borders. That flexibility makes them the perfect tool for applying pressure without officially escalating into war. When Russia and China send ships, they're buying influence time. Iran understands this very well. For Tehran, the presence of these warships is both reassurance and leverage. It signals that Iran is not isolated, that it has powerful friends willing to show up physically, not just diplomatically. That alone changes calculations in every capital watching closely. But this isn't a one-sided story. Western military planners are reading these movements just as carefully. They're asking uncomfortable questions. Is this a temporary show of unity or the beginning of something more permanent? Are these deployments meant to deter action against Iran or to normalize a new balance of power in the region? Another interesting layer is how quiet the official announcements have been. No dramatic speeches, no grand declarations. That silence is intentional. Loud statements invite direct confrontation. Quiet moves force others to respond carefully, often behind closed doors where decisions can reshape policy without public debate. There's also the economic dimension that rarely makes headlines but always drives decisions. Insurance rates for shipping can spike based on perceived risk alone. Energy futures react to possibility, not certainty. Even rumors of increased military presence near Iran can ripple through markets within hours. In that sense, these warships are already having an impact before a single order is given. Historically, moments like this tend to redefine norms. In past decades, the Middle East was largely shaped by Western military dominance. Regional players adjusted around that reality. The visible involvement of Russia and China challenges that assumption. It suggests a future where influence is divided, negotiated, and contested in real time. And then there's the human side, often lost in strategic maps. Iranian citizens live under the weight of sanctions, inflation, and uncertainty. For them, foreign warships aren't abstract symbols. They represent both protection and risk. Protection from isolation, risk of becoming a front line in great power competition. That emotional tension exists even if it's never spoken aloud. As analysts continue to study ship movements and diplomatic language, one thing becomes clear. This isn't about one exercise or one port visit. It's about a shift in confidence. Russia and China are acting like powers that expect to be present in Iran's future, not just commenting on it from afar. The world has seen escalations announced with force before. This one is unfolding with quiet precision, and that's exactly why it matters. Because when the pieces move silently into place, it usually means someone, somewhere, is preparing for a longer game. What that game looks like, who sets the rules, and how far it goes are questions that remain unanswered. But the board has clearly changed, and the next moves will be even harder to ignore. In Washington, military analysts start pulling late nights, comparing satellite imagery with naval logs. In European capitals, diplomats quietly request briefings, trying to read between the lines of carefully worded statements. In the Middle East, governments that have learned the hard way how fast balance can shift are suddenly recalculating their positions. Because when Russia and China coordinate near Iran, it's not just a regional issue anymore. It becomes a global equation. One of the most revealing aspects of this escalation is how it fits into a pattern that has been building for years. Russia and China have conducted joint naval drills before, but rarely with such clear geopolitical weight. Previous exercises were often framed as anti-piracy missions or generic cooperation. This time, the destination itself tells the story. Iran is not neutral ground. It is one of the most sanctioned, scrutinized, and strategically sensitive countries on Earth. Sailing warships toward it is a statement that doesn't need words. Consider the timing again. Russia is already deeply involved in a major confrontation with the West, and China is facing growing pressure in the Pacific. Under normal circumstances, both countries might avoid adding another flashpoint. But that's exactly why this move matters. It suggests a willingness to push back simultaneously on multiple fronts, to test how far influence can stretch without snapping. There's a psychological dimension here that often goes unnoticed. Power isn't just about what you can do, it's about what others believe you might do. When Western planners see Russian and Chinese ships operating near Iran, they have to assume coordination, even if none is publicly confirmed. That assumption alone changes military postures, rules of engagement, and contingency planning. It forces caution. And in geopolitics, forcing caution can be just as effective as forcing retreat. Iran's leadership understands this dynamic intimately. For decades, Tehran has navigated pressure by exploiting rivalries between great powers. What's different now is that those rivals are showing visible alignment. Iran doesn't need a formal alliance announcement. The presence of these warships already strengthens its negotiating position. It tells adversaries, "You're not dealing with us alone." Another insight lies in naval logistics. Deploying warships thousands of miles from home waters requires planning, resupply agreements, and regional cooperation. These ships don't just appear. Ports must be accessible. Fuel must be secured. Communication channels must be open. That implies groundwork already laid, relationships already established. In other words, this escalation didn't start this week. It's the result of months, maybe years of preparation. There's also the question of deterrence versus provocation. From Moscow and Beijing's perspective, these deployments can be framed as stabilizing, a show of presence meant to discourage unilateral action against Iran. From another angle, the same movement looks provocative, increasing the risk of confrontation in already crowded waters. Both interpretations can be true at the same time, which is what makes the situation so volatile. History offers some uncomfortable parallels. During the Cold War, naval encounters often became moments of brinkmanship. With ships shadowing each other at close distances, radar systems locked, commanders making split-second decisions. Many of those incidents never made headlines, but they came dangerously close to disaster. The difference now is that the number of actors involved has increased, and the communication channels between them are more strained. An often overlooked fact is how much of modern conflict happens below the surface, literally and figuratively. Submarines, electronic warfare, cyber operations, and intelligence gathering all accompany visible naval movements. While cameras focus on ships above water, unseen activities are unfolding simultaneously. Signals are intercepted, capabilities are tested, weaknesses are quietly mapped. This hidden layer is where long-term advantages are built. China's role deserves particular attention. For years, analysts debated whether China would remain a primarily economic power in the Middle East. That debate is fading. Beijing's investments in energy infrastructure, ports, and trade routes have created stakes that now require protection. Sending warships toward Iran signals a shift from passive stakeholder to active security participant. It's a line China once hesitated to cross. Russia, meanwhile, gains leverage simply by being present. Its naval experience in contested regions has grown significantly over the past decade. Operating near Iran allows Moscow to gather intelligence, demonstrate reach, and reinforce its image as a global power that cannot be sidelined. It also sends a message to partners and rivals alike that Russia still has options, even under heavy sanctions. Regional reactions add another layer of complexity. Countries neighboring Iran are watching carefully, weighing whether this presence increases stability or invites new risks. Some may see opportunity in diversified partnerships. Others may fear becoming arenas for competition they cannot control. Quiet conversations are happening behind closed doors, and alliances are being tested without formal announcements. Energy markets continue to react subtly but persistently. Even without disruptions, the perception of risk can influence prices, contracts, and long-term planning. Energy companies factor in geopolitical tension years in advance. A sustained Russian and Chinese presence near Iran could accelerate shifts toward alternative routes, reserves, or suppliers. In that sense, these warships influence decisions far beyond military circles. One particularly striking insight is how narratives differ depending on where you stand. In some media, this move is framed as defensive cooperation. In others, it's portrayed as a challenge to the existing world order. Both narratives coexist, shaping public opinion and political space. Leaders often act within the limits of what their populations will accept, and narratives help define those limits. Iran's internal dynamics also play a role. External support can bolster confidence among leadership, but it can also raise expectations among citizens. The promise of strength and partnership doesn't automatically translate into economic relief or social stability. That tension between external posture and internal reality is something Iran has managed for years, but added visibility raises the stakes. As days pass and ships continue their course, the initial shock fades, replaced by something more dangerous: normalization. What feels extraordinary at first can slowly become accepted. And once a new normal sets in, reversing it becomes much harder. This is how long-term shifts happen, not through dramatic declarations, but through steady presence. The key question now isn't whether this escalation matters. It clearly does. The question is how others respond. Will they mirror the move, escalating further? Will they seek quiet diplomacy to de-escalate? Or will they attempt to ignore it, hoping the moment passes? Each choice carries its own risks. One thing is certain. The waters around Iran are no longer just a regional concern. They've become a stage where global power is being tested, measured, and displayed. And the outcome of that test will influence how future conflicts are managed or mismanaged around the world. As the ships sail on, the world watches, calculating not just what is happening, but what might happen next. Because in moments like this, the future is rarely decided by a single move. It's shaped by how everyone reacts to it. As the final pieces of this story come together, it becomes clear that what we are witnessing is not a temporary flare-up, but a chapter in a much longer transformation. When Russian and Chinese warships move in coordination near Iran, the significance goes far beyond the ships themselves. It signals a world where power is no longer concentrated in one direction, where influence flows through multiple channels at once, and where decisions in one region ripple outward faster than ever before. One of the most important insights to understand is that modern escalation doesn't always look like war. There are no formal declarations, no lines drawn on maps with bold markers. Instead, there are movements, pauses, and signals. A ship docking here, a joint patrol there, a carefully phrased statement released late at night. Each step small enough to deny dramatic intent, but together forming a clear pattern. This is how pressure is applied in the 21st century. For Iran, this moment represents both opportunity and danger. On one hand, the presence of Russian and Chinese naval power strengthens Tehran's position against isolation. It reinforces the idea that Iran cannot be easily cornered or ignored. On the other hand, becoming a focal point for great power competition increases risks that Iran does not fully control. History shows that smaller or mid-sized powers often pay the highest price when larger rivals test their strength nearby. Another revealing aspect is how quickly military cooperation can turn into political leverage. Joint naval presence can lead to intelligence sharing. Intelligence sharing can lead to coordinated diplomacy. Coordinated diplomacy can reshape negotiations on sanctions, trade, and security. None of this happens overnight, but once the machinery starts moving, it's difficult to stop. This is why many observers see these warships not as an endpoint, but as a beginning. There's also a lesson here about perception. In global politics, perception often becomes reality. If enough actors believe that Russia, China, and Iran are forming a durable strategic triangle, they will start acting as if it already exists. Policies will adjust, alliances will shift, defense budgets will change. All of this can happen even if no formal alliance is ever signed. Belief alone can alter behavior. The human cost of these power shifts should not be forgotten. While leaders debate strategy and analysts debate intent, ordinary people live with the consequences. Increased military tension raises fears, disrupts economies, and fuels uncertainty. Shipping workers, Energy sector employees and families across the region feel the impact long before any official decision reaches the public. Geopolitics is often discussed in abstract terms, but its effects are deeply personal. Another insight worth noting is how technology amplifies escalation. Today's warships are floating networks connected to satellites, drones, and cyber systems. Information flows instantly and reactions are measured in seconds. This speed reduces the time available for careful judgment. A misunderstanding that might once have been resolved with radio calls now risks being interpreted through automated alerts and algorithms. That reality makes restraint more difficult, not less. China's long-term calculations add a particularly interesting dimension. By expanding its security footprint near Iran, China is quietly testing its ability to operate far from home waters in complex environments. This experience matters. It builds confidence, capability, and institutional knowledge that can be applied elsewhere in the future. What looks like a regional move may be part of a much broader learning curve. Russia, too, gains strategic depth from this moment. By strengthening ties with Iran and coordinating with China, Moscow diversifies its partnerships at a time when relations with the West remain strained. It reduces dependence on any single theater and increases its options. In a world defined by sanctions and counter-sanctions, flexibility is power. Western responses will shape the next phase of this story. Increased naval patrols, renewed diplomatic outreach, or quiet back-channel talks are all possibilities. Each carries trade-offs. Strong responses can deter but also provoke. Soft responses can de-escalate but risk appearing weak. There is no perfect option, only choices with consequences. What makes this situation especially tense is the absence of clear off-ramps. No one has publicly defined what success looks like. Are these warships meant to stay indefinitely? Are they rotating through? Are they a message tied to specific negotiations or events? Ambiguity can be useful, but it can also breed miscalculation. When intentions are unclear, worst-case assumptions often fill the gap. Looking ahead, one thing seems likely. This will not be the last time we see coordinated moves like this. The world is entering an era where multipolar competition is not theoretical, but visible. Ships, aircraft, and bases will increasingly reflect overlapping spheres of influence rather than clear boundaries. Navigating that reality will require restraint, communication, and a willingness to accept that no single power controls the board anymore. The question for viewers and for citizens everywhere is how closely we pay attention to these shifts. It's easy to dismiss naval movements as distant or technical, but they shape the environment in which future decisions are made. They influence whether conflicts are avoided or accelerated. Understanding them is not just an academic exercise, it's part of being informed in a rapidly changing world. As the warships continue their patrols and diplomats continue their quiet conversations, the story remains unfinished. What happens next will depend on choices made in rooms we'll never see, guided by calculations we can only infer. But one thing is certain. The escalation is real, the implications are global, and the stakes are higher than they appear on the surface. If you want to stay ahead of these unfolding stories, if you want clear explanations without the noise, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters, and this conversation is only just beginning.